Hey guys, today we begin with a candlelit voyage that tiptoes through haunted mountain passes, hush-thick jungle clearings, and windswept ocean cliffs where legendary beasts keep midnight watch. From the frost-blurred outline of the Himalayan yeti to the embry-bright gaze of the Caribbean succulent, each creature slips out of folklore to murmur a lullaby rather than a scream. By the end, you'll see how even the world's darkest monsters can cradle us into sleep when retold in a whisper. But before you get comfortable, please make sure to like the video and subscribe if you genuinely appreciate the work I do here. And please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, put your phone or TV remote out of reach, and let's move into tonight's journey together. Welcome to our lantern-lit journey together through the night. As the world outside grows quiet, I invite you to settle more deeply into your chosen resting place. There is no rush here, no urgency in these tales we'll share. The creatures we'll meet have waited centuries in the shadows of human imagination. They can certainly wait a few hours more while you drift between wakefulness and dreams. Our path tonight winds through mist-shrouded fjords, snow-silent mountain passes, and moon-dappled tropical forests. We'll encounter beings shaped by humanity's oldest fears, yet rendered harmless by the gentle distance of storytelling. The lantern I carry casts just enough light to illuminate each tale, but leaves comfortable shadows where your imagination might wander and your consciousness might softly blur. Perhaps you can imagine the quiet turning of aged parchment, or the subtle hiss of a candle flame responding to our breath. The stories themselves seem to emanate not from these modern words, but from some ancient hearth where our ancestors gathered against the darkness. Their whispers have never truly faded, they've only grown softer, more suited to nights like this when sleep beckons but the mind still hungers for one last tale. Should your eyelids grow heavy as we travel, know that this is entirely as it should be. These stories will continue whether you follow every word or slip between sentences into dreams of your own making. The creatures we discuss tonight have always existed in that liminal space between what we know and what we dream. They will understand if you join them there. Our lantern is lit. Our path is clear, though purposefully unhurried. Let us begin our night-long exploration of terror, made gentle by time and telling. What transforms an ordinary animal into a mythical creature? What elevates a strange encounter in the woods into a legend that endures for generations? The answer lies not in the factual truth of such encounters, but in how they resonate with our deepest human experiences. Folklore scholars might tell you that myths represent universal truths, clothed in particular cultural garments. Legends, by contrast, often begin with a kernel of historical reality that grows more fantastical with each retelling. Both emerge from those quiet moments when humans gather to make sense of the shadows beyond their circle of light. There is something paradoxically comforting about frightening stories told slowly, gently. The monsters we name become less terrifying than those left formless in our minds. When we describe the precise way a draugar's seaweed-wrapped fingers reach for unwary sailors, we transform primal terror into something almost companionable, fear we can hold at arm's length and examine by candlelight. Every culture has created its circle around the metaphorical campfire. From Arctic ice fields to tropical jungles, humans have gathered in darkness to speak of things unseen yet deeply felt. The creatures we'll meet tonight emerged from thousands of such gatherings, their features sharpened or softened by countless retellings until they became perfect expressions of cultural fears and warnings. As we move from tale to tale, notice how the creatures often reflect the particular dangers of their native landscapes. Cold regions birth monsters of ice and isolation. Tropical areas create beings that move like sudden fever through the warm night. Yet beneath these differences lie surprisingly similar concerns: the unknown traveler, the unprotected home, the sudden disappearance never explained. Let us travel now to our first destination, where cold sea meets colder shore, and where the dead are said to walk with purpose among the living. The wind across a Scandinavian fjord carries salt and ancient memory. If you sailed these waters 1,000 years ago, you might have heard Norse sailors speaking in hushed tones about the draugathos who die at sea, yet refuse to rest beneath the waves. These revenants appear as mariners still clothed in the trappings of their watery graves. Seaweed drapes their shoulders like ceremonial robes. Barnacles cluster at collar and cuff. Their skin carries the bloodless pallor of creatures that dwell where sunlight cannot reach. And their eyes, if you're unfortunate enough to glimpse them, contain the cold, implacable depth of the ocean itself. Norse beliefs held that improper burial created such restless dead. A body lost to the sea might not complete its journey to the afterlife. Instead, it might linger, growing stronger rather than decaying, nursing grievances against the living who continue to enjoy the simple pleasures of hearth and home. The wooden ships that plied these northern waters creaked with their own vocabulary of sounds. On quiet nights, sailors would lie awake in their narrow berths, listening for the difference between the normal settling of timbers and something heavier, deliberate the sound of dripping footsteps moving across the deck. Sailors who feared the Draugr's attention developed elaborate rituals of appeasement. They might pour the first sip of ale into the waters before drinking. Some carved protective runes into their oarlocks, or whispered ancient verses as they passed certain treacherous headlands where ships had been lost. Others carried small pouches of graveyard soilarth, calling to those who should rest within it. The Draugr were said to possess unnatural strength, capable of crushing stone between their fingers or tearing the mast from a ship with a single effort. Yet their movements betrayed their naturia peculiar stiffness, as though their limbs remembered the rigor of death, despite their animation. They walked with the rhythm of waves against a hull, inexorable and patient. Most fearsome was their mastery of the weather. Stories tell of clear skies darkening suddenly when a Draugr turned its attention shipward. Fog might materialize from nothing, enveloping vessels in a disorienting shroud where directions lost meaning and familiar coastlines vanished. In such moments, the only sound might be the slow drip of seawater from something gradually approaching across the deck. Yet even these northern terrors eventually retreat with the coming of dawn. The light reveals only ordinary puddles of seawater, perhaps an inexplicable dampness tracing a path from rail to cabin door. Nothing more substantial remains, just the lingering scent of brine and decay, already fading in the morning air. Let us leave these cold waters now, though we won't travel far from winter's embrace. Our lantern guides us eastward, to islands where snow falls with a silence so complete it seems to absorb all other sound. In Japan's mountainous regions, travelers of the Edo period spoke of encounters on snow-covered passes with women of extraordinary beauty and deadly intent. The Yuki-onna snow woman emerged from blizzards like a fever dream of winter itself, her pale skin luminous under moonlight, her kimono seemingly woven from snowflakes. Those who chronicled such appearances described her breath as a visible vapor, more substantial than ordinary exhalation, almost like the morning mist that rises from warm lakes in cold air. Her hair remained perfectly black against the whiteness surrounding her, and her eyes held the cold blue of deep ice where sunlight struggles to penetrate. The Yuki-onna appeared most often to solitary travelers caught in unexpected snowstorms. As daylight faded and the path disappeared beneath fresh powder, a traveler might glimpse movement where no living thing should be able to move with such grace. The soft flutter of kimono sleeves might be mistaken at first for snow falling from burdened branches. These encounters contained a particular moral architecture common to Japanese folklore. The snow woman frequently tested human character through the offer of shelter or guidance. Those who demonstrated selflessness might be spared, while those revealing baser natures faced her frozen kiss of breath that could extract the very warmth from human lungs. Mountain villages developed intricate practices of hospitality, partly in response to these legends. A traveler given shelter during a blizzard represented not merely a social obligation but a spiritual one. Who could say whether the snow-covered figure at one's door was merely human, or something wearing humanity like a borrowed robe, better to err on the side of generosity? The Yuki-onna's footprints revealed her supernatural nature. Despite her apparent weight and substance, she left no impression in even the freshest snow. She moved like winter itself, present everywhere, but visible only in its effects. The sudden deepening of cold, the strange patterns of frost forming on window panes, the unnatural stillness of the air, these were her signatures. Let us travel now to warmer climes, though the creatures we'll encounter there bring no comfort with their heat. Our lantern casts tropical shadows as we visit the Caribbean islands, where colonial fears blended with African spiritual traditions. The Sukuyon emerges from the collision of cultures in the Caribbean. By day, she appears as an elderly woman, unremarkable except perhaps for her solitary habits. But as night markets shutter and fishermen secure their boats, this seemingly frail figure undergoes a terrifying transformation. The Sukuyant's unique horror lies in her method of metamorphosis. She sheds her human skin entirely, carefully folding and storing this temporary vessel like clothing to be reclaimed later. What emerges is her true form, a ball of sulphurous fire that moves through the night sky with terrible purpose. Where she passes, leaves curl and blacken from her heat, and sleeping dogs whimper without waking. French colonial influences merge with West African spiritual beliefs in this creature's capabilities. She seeks human victims not for immediate death, but for the gradual extraction of life essence. Those visited by the Sukuyan might wake with unexplained bruises or small puncture wounds, feeling inexplicably exhausted despite a full night's rest. Over time, repeated visitations drain victims entirely, leaving behind only hollow vessels reminiscent of the skin the Sukuyant herself discards. Protective measures against this fiery entity center around her peculiar limitations. She cannot cross thresholds protected by scattered salt or specific herbs. The compulsive counting behavior attributed to several Caribbean spirits applies to her as well-scattered rice or seeds might delay her until dawn, as she feels compelled to gather every grain before proceeding. Most vulnerable is the moment of her return to human form. If her discarded skin can be found and treated with salt or pepper, she cannot re-enter it. Dawn would then find her trapped in her fiery aspect, unable to disguise herself among the human community she preys upon. The soft clatter of shutters being secured against the night carries extra significance in villages where Sukuyan stories persist. What might be simple preparation for darkness elsewhere becomes a ritual of protection, a community's acknowledgement of forces that transcend ordinary understanding. Our lantern now guides us northward again, to mist-shrouded Scottish landscapes where water meets land in uncertain boundaries. Here, another shapeshifter waits by lonely shores. The Each-Wisgawater horse of Scottish Highland folklore embodies the particular danger of boundaries between elements. Neither fully creature of land nor of water, it occupies the liminal spaces of reed-lined lochshores and riverbanks where footing becomes treacherous. In its most benign appearance, the Each-Wis manifests as a handsome horse, perhaps with subtle abnormalities like seaweed tangled in its mane or water perpetually dripping from its coat. It might be found grazing peacefully near water's edge, seemingly abandoned and available to the unwary traveller seeking convenient transport. Highland crofters incorporated warnings about this creature into their folk songs and children's tales. The musical tradition of Scotland preserved these warnings through generations, the soft notes of a mother's singing voice conveying knowledge that might one day save her children's lives. Never mount a horse found near the water, these lullabies cautioned, no matter how gentle its manner or how urgent your journey. For those who disregarded such wisdom, the consequences proved fatal. Once mounted, the Each-Wisga's skin became adhesive, preventing the rider from dismounting as the creature returned to its watery domain. Its gallop would begin gently enough along the shore, gradually accelerating as it turned toward deeper water, ultimately plunging beneath the surface with its trapped victim. Rain tapping against cottage windows takes on different meaning in regions where Each-Wis stories endure. The sound might be merely weather, or it might be watery hoofbeats approaching the distinction, crucial but often impossible to determine until too late. Fishing communities develop particular rituals when approaching lochs known to harbour these creatures. They might cast bread upon the water as a diversionary offering, or whisper specific phrases that held no meaning beyond their purported protective qualities. Most importantly, they approached water with appropriate reverence merely as a resource, but as a threshold to another realm with its own rules and inhabitants. Our journey now takes us to much higher elevations, where the air thins and snow persists year-round. The Himalayan mountains harbour mysteries glimpsed briefly by Western explorers, but long known to local inhabitants. The Yeti emerged in Western consciousness through 19th-century explorer diaries, but its existence in Sherpa and Tibetan folklore extends back centuries earlier. Known variously as Wild Man glacier being, or mountain man, this creature inhabited the most inaccessible regions where humans rarely ventured. Buddhist monastery artwork sometimes depicts the Yeti with surprising specificity footprints in snow, occasional glimpses of a large, hair-covered figure moving upright between distant peaks. Unlike Western representations that often emphasize monstrosity, these traditional depictions suggest a being that belongs in its environment, neither malevolent nor benevolent, but simply existing parallel to human civilization. The slow crunch of snow underfoot takes on different significance in Himalayan passes. Experienced guides attend to subtle variations in this sound, the expected compression beneath human boots versus something heavier, with a different gait and purpose. They listen for these distinctions, especially in weather that limits visibility, when other senses must compensate for what cannot be seen. Western explorers who reported Yeti encounters often emphasized feelings of being watched rather than direct sightings. The sensation of an intelligent presence, observing from just beyond the range of visibility, persisted even when physical evidence proved elusive. This subtle awareness, neither confirmed nor denied, characterizes many Yeti accounts from even the most skeptical expedition members. The most compelling aspects of Yeti lore emerge not from sensationalized accounts but from the respectful distance maintained in local traditions. The creature represents not a monster to be conquered, but a reminder of nature's capacity to harbor mysteries beyond human understanding. In this framing, the absence of definitive proof becomes not a failure but an appropriate boundary between worlds that need not fully intersect. Our lantern now guides us southward and westward, to ancient lands where philosophy and mythology mingled beneath Mediterranean skies. The olive groves of Greece harbor shadows older than many civilizations. The empusa of Greek folklore emerges from references in ancient playwrights' works, rather than peasant tales alone unusual for a creature of such distinctly supernatural qualities. Aristophanes mentions her in his comedies, suggesting her legends were sophisticated enough to be referenced for learned Athenian audiences who would recognize the allusion without explanation. Greek travelers of antiquity faced particular dangers on isolated roads between city-states. Roadside inns offered necessary shelter but also vulnerability to strangers met in such transitional spaces. The empusa exploited this liminality, appearing as a beautiful woman to solitary male travelers, only revealing her true nature when her victim had been lured into isolation. Her distinctive features included legs of mismatched materials sewn of bronze, one from a Donkeya hybrid quality she concealed beneath flowing robes until the moment of revelation. She fed vampirically on the life essence of her victims, though blood itself figured less prominently than the more abstract concept of vital energy. The Parthenon and other temples, illuminated by flickering oil lamps, created environments where shadows moved with seeming independence from their casters. In such atmospheres, stories of the empusa found perfect expression, the beautiful shifting to horrific in the blink of an eye, the seemingly solid revealing impossible hybridity upon closer inspection. The chorus in Greek tragedies often delivered warnings and moral commentary in rhythmic, lullaby-like cadences. These formal elements transformed even terrifying content into something almost soothingly predictable in its structure. The empusa's legends, when incorporated into such performances, became simultaneously frightening and comforting, the monster named, and therefore contained within artistic boundaries. We travel next across vast oceans to the Philippine archipelago, where Spanish colonial influences merged with indigenous beliefs to create creatures uniquely adapted to tropical nights. The Manananggal appears in chronicles written by Spanish friars attempting to document and often demonize local spiritual beliefs they encountered upon colonization. Despite this problematic origin, the creature transcended these beginnings to become a distinct entity in Filipino folklore that persists into modern storytelling. This uniquely disturbing entity presents during daylight as an ordinary woman, typically beautiful and often charming. By night, however, she undergoes a transformation more grotesque than any we've yet encountered. At the waist, her body separates entirely, the upper portion growing bat-like wings that carry her through the night sky while the lower half remains hidden until her return. The moon reflecting off nipa palm roofs creates particular patterns of light and shadow in traditional Philippine villages. During certain phases, moonlight might illuminate the underside of these thatched structures, while leaving the ground in darkness, the perfect condition for spotting the silhouette of a manananggal in flight, her incomplete form unmistakable against the night sky. Protective measures against this creature centered around the vulnerability of her temporarily abandoned lower half. Salt, garlic, and specific prayers placed near this hidden portion would prevent reattachment before dawn. Without reunification, the creature would perish in the morning light of fate that led manananggal to guard their lower halves with exceptional care. The gentle sounds of roosters beginning their pre-dawn announcements carried special significance in communities where manananggal fears persisted. These natural timekeepers marked the boundary beyond which the creature must complete her return or face destruction. The progression from isolated first calls to the full chorus of morning birds tracked the diminishing window of the manananggal's power. Let us journey now to the southern hemisphere, where vast rainforests harbor creatures adapted to environments of extraordinary biodiversity and complex ecological relationships. The Curupira emerges from the meeting of indigenous Brazilian cosmology with Portuguese colonial observations. 16th century Jesuit reports describe encounters with this forest guardian, whose primary physical distinction manifests in backward-facing feet that leave confounding tracks in Amazon soil. This directional reversal serves both practical and symbolic purposes in the creature's mythology. Practically, the backward footprints confuse hunters who might follow the Curupira's trail, leading them deeper into the forest rather than toward their quarry. Symbolically, this inversion suggests the creature's connection to alternative understandings of order, and progressiona being who moves contrary to normal human patterns. The crackling of campfires beneath giant kapok trees takes on different significance when Curupira stories are shared. Each unexplained sound from the surrounding darkness might be attributed to this creature's approach or departure. Yet, unlike many entities we've encountered, the Curupira's attention falls most heavily not on the innocent, but on those who take from the forest without proper respect, hunters who kill beyond need or who target young animals or pregnant females. Cicadas and other insects create rhythmic soundscapes in the Amazon that almost resemble intentional communication. These natural choruses form the backdrop against which Curupira legends evolve, the insistent, pulsing quality of these sounds resembling a cradle song that might either lull listeners to sleep or hypnotize them into following the creature into forest depths from which they might never return. The Curupira's physical appearance varies somewhat across regional tellings, but consistently includes fiery red hair that stands upright as though perpetually startled or alarmed. This distinctive feature makes the creature visible even in dense forest shadow, a warning coloration that signals its protective role rather than predatory intent. Having traveled the world meeting its mythical inhabitants, we might now consider what threads connect these seemingly disparate beings across cultural boundaries. The capacity to shift between forms appears repeatedly in creatures from vastly different environments. The Sukuyant sheds her skin, the Ichwij transforms from horse to water being, the Manananggal separates into distinct portions. This prevalence suggests a universal human concern with appearances that deceive the terror not merely of the monstrous, but of the momentary belief in safety before revelation. Cold figures prominently in Northern European and Asian traditions, while heat characterizes Caribbean entities. These environmental adaptations reflect the particular challenges of survival in different regions, yet the underlying message remains consistent: respect the specific dangers of your landscape and develop appropriate caution and ritual in response. Isolation emerges as perhaps the most consistent element across these varied traditions. The creatures we've encountered rarely threaten communities acting in concert, instead targeting solitary travelers or those who have in some way separated themselves from protective social structures. This pattern reveals a profound human understanding of safety through connection, of vulnerability in separation. Humanity's talent for storytelling transforms these shared fears into something approaching comfort. The rhythm of tales told and retold creates a predictable framework within which even the most terrifying content becomes manageable. As you listen to these stories, perhaps you've noticed your own breathing, adopting a slower, more regular pattern the cadence of narrative, lulling you toward restfulness, even as the content might suggest otherwise. Our final thread ties these creatures to the environments that birthed them. The Draugr belongs inescapably to cold northern seas as surely as the Sukuyon embodies tropical heat. The Yuki-onna cannot exist separate from mountain snowfall any more than the Kurupira can leave its forest home. In recognizing these connections, we acknowledge our own integration with landscape separate from nature, but continuous with it, shaped by the same forces that gave these creatures form in our collective imagination. As our lantern-lit journey nears its conclusion, I want to thank you for accompanying me through these shadow-filled tales. Whether you've remained fully awake or have drifted between consciousness and dreams, your presence has given purpose to these ancient stories, allowing them once more to fulfill their function of connecting human minds across time and distance. For those who might wish to continue exploring these mythical landscapes, numerous scholarly works await your attention. Folklorists have compiled extensive collections from oral traditions worldwide, preserving narratives that might otherwise fade from memory. Anthropologists have documented the social functions these tales serve within their communities of origin. Comparative mythologists have traced surprising connections between seemingly unrelated traditions, revealing patterns that transcend geographical boundaries. These sources await like unopened books on shelves just beyond our circle of lantern light. They need not be consulted immediately indeed. This moment calls not for academic pursuit, but for the gradual surrender to restfulness that these stories have been preparing throughout our journey together. Listen now to the distant call of an owl somewhere in the darkness. This sound connects us to countless generations who heard similar calls while sharing similar tales. The night continues its slow progression toward dawn, but there is no need to witness its entire cycle. You may release your attention now, allowing it to soften and expand beyond the boundaries of conscious thought. The creatures we've met tonight will continue their existence in the realm of human imagination, whether or not we actively recall their features. They have persisted through centuries of telling and retelling, their essential qualities remarkably preserved, despite constant adaptation to new cultural contexts. They will remain available should you wish to revisit them in future wanderings through folklore's shadowed pathways. As our journey concludes, I invite you to notice how your body has settled more deeply into restfulness. Perhaps your breathing has adopted the rhythm of gentle waves against northern shores, or the soft patter of tropical rain on thatched roofs. Your thoughts may drift like snow across mountain passes or float like embers above Caribbean nights. Whatever imagery accompanies you into sleep, know that you travel in the company of humanity's oldest stories, never truly alone in the darkness. Rest now, sleep deeply. Dream without fear of what might linger at the edges of consciousness. The lantern is extinguished, but its warmth remains. The tales are complete, but their echoes continue. The night embraces all storyteller, listener, and the countless beings that exist only when we speak their names into the quiet darkness. In every culture, in every corner of the world, these beings serve as bridges between our conscious and unconscious minds. They are the guardians of that delicate threshold between wakefulness and dreams, between known and unknown. Consider how the Draugr moves through northern waters with the same rhythm as your breathing, now slow, deep, inevitable. Their seaweed-draped forms mirror the way your thoughts have begun to drift and float, untethered from daytime's sharp edges. Even their cold touch, so fearsome in tales, now serves only to remind you of the comfort of your own warmth, wrapped safe in your chosen resting place. The Yuki-onna's silent passage through mountain snowfields echoes the quiet settling of your mind. Like snow gradually covering a landscape, sleep approaches without hurry or force. Each snowflake of drowsiness lands softly, building imperceptibly until consciousness is blanketed in gentle white. Her cold breath, once deadly in stories, now serves only to cool the embers of daily concerns, allowing them to fade into restful ash. Remember the Sukuyant's nightly transformation, how she sheds her daylight skin to embrace her true nature. Perhaps you feel a similar shifting now, as your daytime self slowly dissolves into dream self. This transformation, unlike hers, brings no terror but rather relief. Like her, you too can leave behind the shape that serves you in sunlight, and adopt one better suited to night's deeper truths. The each Whizger's watery domain calls to mind the fluid state between consciousness and unconsciousness where you now drift. Like a locked surface at twilight, your thoughts ripple and reflect, showing both sky above and depths below. Yet, unlike those who fell prey to the waterhorse's deadly gallop, you can surrender to these depths knowing they will cradle rather than claim you. Even the Munanangle's divided nature speaks to this moment of transition. As sleep approaches, you too exist in two states at once, still aware, yet gradually disconnecting from physical sensation. But unlike her fearsome separation, yours brings only peace. Your consciousness floats free while your body remains safely at rest. No need to seek reunion before dawn. The Yeti's watchful presence in remote mountain passes transforms now into a benevolent guardianship of your journey into sleep. Those same keen eyes that travelers feared now keep vigil over your drifting thoughts, ensuring no disturbance breaks through the snow-soft silence of approaching dreams. The sensation of being watched becomes a comfort. You are observed, protected, allowed to rest without need for vigilance. The Empusa's ability to shift between forms reminds us how dreams themselves transform one thing into another. As you teeter on sleep's threshold, let this quality of fluid change guide you forward. Unlike her victims, you need not fear what strange shapes your thoughts might take. In the realm of dreams, all transformations are natural, all changes part of night's gentle progression. The Kurapira's backward steps, so confounding to hunters, now mark a path away from day's linear thinking. Follow those reversed footprints deeper into dream logic, where time might flow in any direction and causality matters less than connection. Let them lead you away from the orderly forest of waking thought into night's wilder, more fertile territories. Above you, perhaps the moon has shifted position, its light finding new paths through your window, or perhaps clouds have gathered, creating a darkness that wraps around you like a familiar blanket. The exact conditions matter less than your growing distance from theme, each physical detail of your surroundings becoming less distinct as inner landscapes take precedence. The folklore creatures we've discussed understand this boundary between worlds better than any mortal being. They exist precisely where one state of reality bleeds into another sea, into land, air, into water, waking into sleeping. Let them guide you across your own thresholds now. Their centuries of experience in navigating these in-between spaces makes them perfect companions for this final phase of our journey together. Notice how the weight of your body seems to shift and settle, as though gravity itself has softened its hold. This is how legends say the Yuki-onna moves across snow without leaving footprints, becoming something between solid and ethereal. You need not resist this pleasant dissolution. Like snow settling on a mountain meadow, let yourself be transformed by night's quiet accumulation. The rhythmic sounds around you, be they the hum of distant traffic, the whisper of wind, or the soft breathing of a sleeping household, merge now into something like the songs sailors once used to ward off drauga. These modern lullabies serve the same purpose as those ancient chants, marking safe passage from one state of being to another. Let them carry you forward, or perhaps backward, or sideways into sleep's embrace. Rest now, knowing you travel in well-mapped territories, even if the maps themselves are drawn in dream ink on night paper. Sleep deeply, protected by the very beings whose stories have accompanied us through this long, gentle darkness. Dream without fear, for you are now fluent in the language of shadows, and know them for what they truly are, simply stories wrapped in darkness, waiting to be transformed by morning's light. The lantern is extinguished, but its warmth remains. The tales are complete, but their echoes continue. The night embraces all storyteller, listener, and the countless beings that exist only when we speak their names into the quiet darkness. Sleep, sleep, sleep. In the gentle hush that comes before true daybreak, Chateau du Clou rests in tranquil anticipation of morning. The year is 1517, and the stones of this manor have cooled overnight, holding within them the pleasant chill of early autumn in the Loire Valley. Dew has settled on the vineyard leaves surrounding the chateau, transforming ordinary foliage into constellations of tiny, perfect spheres. Each droplet captures the first hint of approaching sunrise, little worlds of amber and rose suspended in delicate balance. Moving through the garden with measured steps is an elderly man, his white beard catching the earliest light. Though his left hand trembles slightly with age, Leonardo da Vinci's attention remains steadfast as he scatters breadcrumbs along the garden path. Songbirds have learned his routine over the 3 years since King Francis I invited him to France, and they approach with increasing boldness. A finch alights near his foot, head tilting with that peculiar avian curiosity that Leonardo has sketched countless times. The master moves with deliberate slowness now, at 65 years finding grace in unhurried motion rather than speed. His fingers, once capable of the most precise brushwork Europe had ever witnessed, now sometimes betray him with unexpected tremors. Yet there remains a dignity in how he accommodates this change, adjusting his movements to work with, rather than against, the new limitations of his aging body. The morning ritual of feeding birds connects Leonardo to the natural rhythms he has observed throughout his lifetime. In his journals, written in his distinctive mirror script flowing from right to left across the page, he has noted how different species arrive in specific sequences. First come the bold robins, then the cautious finches, and finally the territorial sparrows. Through this simple act of observation, even the feeding of birds becomes an extension of his lifelong scientific inquiry. The air carries the scent of lavender planted beneath the chateau windows, mixed with the earthier aroma of the vineyard soil still cool from night. Leonardo breathes deeply, his physician's understanding of the human body making him conscious of how morning air fills his lungs differently than evenings. In his anatomical drawings, he has traced the pathways of breath through the human form with unprecedented accuracy, yet he takes simple pleasure in experiencing what he has so meticulously documented. Behind him, the manor begins its gradual awakening. A kitchen servant draws water from the well. The sound of the wooden bucket against stone travels clearly in the still morning air. Soon there will be bread baking, apprentices stirring, and the countless small interactions that comprise daily life in a noble household. But for now, Leonardo occupies this threshold moment when night has released its hold but day has not yet asserted its demands. His thoughts turn to the work awaiting him inside. Unlike Michelangelo, who drives himself with almost violent intensity, Leonardo has always allowed his mind to wander between projects, following curiosity rather than obligation. The French king understands this tendency better than previous patrons, offering the master freedom to pursue his interests without constant demands for completed works. It is perhaps the most generous gift the aging artist has received, time untethered from expectation. As the sun finally crests the distant hills, Leonardo turns toward the manor. His rooms there contain the accumulated evidence of a mind that refuses categorical boundaries. To step inside is to enter a place where art and science have never been separated, where beauty and function intertwine as naturally as the vines climbing the chateau walls. The corridor leading to Leonardo's workshop catches morning light through eastern windows, illuminating dust motes that drift like minuscule celestial bodies. The door itself remains closed until nearly midday, by unspoken agreement among the household. These morning hours belong to the master alone, a time for contemplation uninterrupted by even his most favored apprentices. Inside, the workshop opens into a space both ordered and chaotic. Tables arranged with deliberate precision support stacks of materials in various states of creative disarray. The paradox would bring a smile to the Aristotelian scholars Leonardo has debated throughout his life how something can be simultaneously structured and unstructured, planned and spontaneous. Most prominent among the workshop's contents are the sketchbooks, their leather bindings worn to suppleness by years of handling. They lean against each other in precarious piles, organized according to a system comprehensible only to their creator. Some contain studies for grand commissions, others document dissections performed during his time in Milan, while still others explore problems of hydraulics, optics, or military engineering. Unlike finished paintings displayed in palaces and cathedrals, these notebooks reveal Leonardo's mind in continuous motion. Their pages contain the true legacy of his genius: questions asked rather than answers provided, processes explored rather than conclusions reached. In an age increasingly concerned with definitive statements, Leonardo's sketches remain gloriously provisional. One book lies open from the previous evening, displaying spiraling sketches of what appears to be a vertical screw designed to lift into the air. These studies for a helical airscrew represent Leonardo's ongoing fascination with flight. Nearby pages show careful observations of bird wings during different phases of movement, the anatomy of bat membranes, and calculations of air resistance against surfaces of varying shapes. What distinguishes these mechanical dreams from mere fantasy is the rigorous observation underlying them. Leonardo does not simply imagine flying machines. He studies how natural flight occurs, seeks underlying principles, and applies mathematical relationships. That his helicopter will remain unbuilt for centuries does not diminish the revolutionary methodology guiding its conception. Adjacent to the flight studies, a page shifts abruptly to plans for canal systems to redirect the Arno River, then just as suddenly transitions to half-completed faces caught in enigmatic expressions. This juxtaposition might seem scattered to outside observers, but reflects Leonardo's understanding of underlying connections between seemingly disparate phenomena. The flow of water follows principles related to the flow of air. The muscles producing a human smile operate according to the same mechanical laws governing a bird's wing. The unfinished quality of these sketches inspires a particular kind of wonder. Where completed works present conclusions, these partial studies invite continuation. The viewer's mind naturally extends lines beyond their endpoints, completes suggested forms, and participates in the creative process. Leonardo understood this power of the unfinished how. It engages imagination more actively than the resolved and completed. Among the scattered pages appears something surprisingly mundane, a grocery list, written in the same right-to-left mirror script as his most profound scientific inquiries. The item segs, bread, particular pigments from specific vendors remind us that genius requires sustenance and materials. Leonardo approaches the ordinary necessities of life with the same attentive curiosity he brings to anatomical studies or engineering problems. His handwriting flows with identical care, whether describing the inner workings of the human heart or requesting particular cheeses from the market. Some sketchbooks contain studies for paintings now housed in royal collections. Others hold ideas never translated to canvas. A series of preliminary drawings for the Virgin and Child with St. Anne reveals how Leonardo refined compositions through countless variations before committing to final forms. Nearby, studies for battle scenes commissioned by the Florentine government but never completed demonstrate his approach to capturing human figures in dynamic motion. The sketchbooks contain evidence of Leonardo's famous left-handedness, with occasional smudges where his palm dragged across fresh ink. These small imperfections humanize work that might otherwise seem superhuman in its insight and execution. They remind us that even the most extraordinary mind operates through ordinary physical mean hand moving across paper, eye-observing result, mind-adjusting approach. Perhaps most intriguing are the notebooks containing Leonardo's personal observations on the creative process itself. The painter who draws merely by practice and by eye, without any reason, is like a mirror which copies everything placed in front of it, without being conscious of their existence, he writes. These reflections reveal an artist constantly examining not just his subjects but his own relationship to thema mind, watching itself at work. As morning advances, light shifts across the workshop floor in patterns Leonardo has mapped throughout different seasons. The restless sketchbook piles seem to breathe in this changing illumination, their contents neither fully revealed nor entirely hidden, much like the mind that produced them. The gradual brightening of day brings new activity to Leonardo's workspace. By mid-morning, apprentices have arrived and taken their places at designated tables. They move with deliberate quietness, aware of their master's preference for a workspace free from unnecessary noise. Their presence transforms the solitary contemplation of early morning into a communal yet still meditative atmosphere of shared purpose. Near the eastern window, where natural light remains strongest throughout morning hours, an apprentice grinds pigments with slow, circular motions. The process cannot be hurried. Proper preparation of color requires patience. Ochre from the hills of Siena reduces to fine powder beneath the stone muller, its earthy scent mingling with linseed oil waiting in ceramic cups. Leonardo has taught his students that paintings begin their lives long before brush touches surface in this methodical creation of materials. The master himself moves between workstations, observing without immediately commenting. Despite his reputation for unfinished projects, Leonardo demonstrates remarkable patience as a teacher. He understands that learning, like creativity, cannot be forced into artificial timelines. When he does speak, his guidance often comes as questions rather than directives. What do you observe about how shadow falls across that curved surface? Or, why might the wing design fail when scaled to human size? This approach reflects Leonardo's own intellectual development. Though largely self-educated, he maintained throughout his life the humble acknowledgement that nature, not human authority, provides the most reliable instruction. He extends this philosophy to his teachings, encouraging apprentices to look closely, question assumptions, and discover principles rather than merely memorize techniques. In one corner, a young man struggles with anatomical proportions in a figure drawing. Leonardo approaches slowly, his shadow falling across the work in progress. Rather than immediately identifying errors, he asks the student to place his drawing beside a detailed écorché study from Leonardo's own collection. The comparison reveals discrepancies more effectively than verbal correction could. "The body speaks its own truth," Leonardo murmurs. "Our task is to listen with our eyes." The quiet buzz of flies against workshop windows punctuates these teaching moments. Leonardo has studied these insects as meticulously as he has human anatomy or botanical specimens, filling pages with detailed drawings of their compound eyes and translucent wings. Where others might find them nuisances, he sees further evidence of nature's ingenious design. Their persistent motion against glass demonstrates principles of persistence and adaptation he has documented in his scientific writings. By midday, the workshop has achieved a harmonious rhythm, pigments grinding, pens scratching across paper, occasional murmured conversations about technical problems. This productive quiet represents another aspect of Leonardo's legacy, not just what he created personally, but what he cultivated in those around him. A way of seeing, a method of inquiry, a patience with process these gifts to his students may ultimately prove as valuable as any painting or invention. As afternoon approaches, Leonardo guides select apprentices from the main workshop toward a converted barn adjacent to the chateau. This separate building houses larger projects impossible to accommodate in the main workspace, primarily the mechanical inventions that increasingly occupy the master's attention during his final years. The transition from workshop to barn brings a noticeable shift in atmosphere. Where the morning space emphasized observation and representation, this environment celebrates fabrication and mechanism. Wooden gears of various sizes hang from rafters alongside pulleys, levers, and partially assembled devices whose purposes remain mysterious even to the apprentices permitted to assist with their construction. Leonardo moves differently here, his gait more exploratory as he navigates between workbenches laden with tools and materials. Despite his age and occasional physical limitations, he demonstrates surprising dexterity when handling mechanical components, his fingers remembering movements rehearsed through decades of craftsmanship. Most prominent among the barn's contents are Leonardo's studies of flight. Not just the helical designs seen in earlier sketchbooks, but full-sized wooden armatures, extending like enormous skeletal wings. These constructions combine engineering precision with naturalistic observation, their structures mimicking the articulation of bird wings while incorporating innovations no bird has needed to evolve. The afternoon breeze entering through open barn doors causes these experimental devices to shift slightly, creating a gentle clacking as wooden components touch and separate. This subtle animation lends the unfinished machines an almost creature-like presence, as though they exist in some intermediate state between inanimate construction and living entity. Leonardo sometimes pauses in his work just to observe these small, wind-induced movements, finding in them further insights about balance and resistance. An apprentice carefully adjusts tensioning elements on what appears to be a self-propelling cart design. Leonardo watches without intervening, allowing the young man to discover through trial and error why certain configurations fail while others succeed. This practical experimentation complements the theoretical work conducted in morning sketchbooks, testing principles against material reality, embracing failure as informative rather than discouraging. As daylight begins its gradual retreat, Leonardo dismisses his apprentices and remains alone among his mechanical creations. The altered quality of late afternoon light transforms the barn interior, lending golden emphasis to some elements while relegating others to deepening shadow. This natural chiaroscuro provides a final opportunity for observation. Before day concludes, different mechanical relationships become visible or obscured as illumination changes. In this waning light, Leonardo often engages in his most personal reflections. No longer performing the role of master for attentive students, he communes directly with his creations and, through them, with time itself. At 65, he has witnessed extraordinary changes across Renaissance Europe, while simultaneously driving many of those transformations through his own work. Yet the proportion of what remains undiscovered still humbles him. Returning to his private chambers as twilight embraces Château du Clou, Leonardo lights a single candle. Its flame stands remarkably steady in the evening stillness, casting elongated shadows across the room's stone walls. He settles into a chair positioned to observe both the candle and the darkening landscape visible through his window, the dual illuminations of human invention and natural cycle. In his journals, Leonardo has written extensively about time's passage, noting how it manifests differently in various natural processes. Water erodes stone gradually over centuries, while light traverses great distances in imperceptible instants. Human creativity occupies some middle territory, capable of sudden inspiration, yet requiring patient development. Time stays long enough for anyone who will use it. He writes in one passage, acknowledging both its limitations and its sufficiency. The candle's gradual diminishment mirrors Leonardo's own awareness of mortality without inspiring despair. He has filled thousands of pages, painted works that will define beauty for centuries to come, and conceived machines that await future generations to construct. If most projects remain unfinished, this seems increasingly appropriating a recognition that knowledge itself remains perpetually incomplete, awaiting further development by minds not yet born. As night deepens around the chateau, Leonardo's thoughts drift between projects left in various states of completion. The Mona Lisa, still in his possession even here in France, awaits further refinements to her enigmatic expression. Anatomical studies lack final annotations. The ideal city remains safely perfect in sketches, uncompromised by practical implementation. These aren't failures of discipline, but acknowledgements of process each project, existing along a continuum of becoming rather than achieving artificial conclusion. Your own journey through creativity likely follows similar patterns. Ideas begun enthusiastically sometimes settle into dormancy before unexpected connections revive them in new forms. Projects declared finished continue evolving in how they're understood and interpreted. The notebook you've been keeping, whether filled with words, images, or calculations, needn't reach artificial completion to hold value. As Leonardo's candle burns lower, casting increasingly subtle light across his final journals, perhaps you too might consider setting aside your own work for now. The ideas will remain, possibly growing clearer through rest rather than continued effort. Like Leonardo watching daylight gradually yield to darkness, you might allow wakefulness to surrender gently to sleep, trusting that what matters most will persist through the transition. Rest your eyes as Leonardo finally closes his journals. Let your breathing find the same unhurried rhythm that characterized his careful observations. The creative mind requires fallow periods, as surely as fields need seasons of rest. Your thoughts, like his countless unfinished sketches, will retain their potential through the night, perhaps arranging themselves into new configurations while consciousness recedes. Sleep now, carrying with you the permission Leonardo granted himself to leave things beautifully unfinished, to trust in continuation beyond what we can currently see or know. Sleep with the same curiosity that guided his lifetime of investigation, the same acceptance of natural cycles. Sleep while possibilities remain open, while potential stays undefined, while dreams continue the work that wakefulness has set aside. The rain falls in gentle patterns against the drawing-room windows of Ada Lovelace's London home, each drop catching momentary lamplight before sliding into darkness. It is November 1842, and the evening has settled into that particular quietude that comes when weather keeps the outside world at respectful distance. Inside, warmth emanates from a well-tended hearth, its flames casting a golden glow across the Turkish carpet and illuminating the figure seated before it with patient attention. Augusta, Ada King, Countess of Lovelace, arranges her papers with methodical precision. At 27, she possesses both the aristocratic composure bestowed by her title and the focused intensity inherited from her absent father, the poet Lord Byron. Unlike him, however, Ada has channeled her imaginative capacities toward mathematics rather than verse. Tonight, she continues her painstaking work translating and elaborating upon Charles Babbage's lectures regarding his theoretical analytical engine, perhaps the most sophisticated calculating machine yet conceived by human intellect. The oak writing desk at which she sits contains multiple drawers, each designated for different aspects of her work. One holds correspondence with Babbage himself, lengthy letters filled with questions, clarifications, and increasingly, Ada's own insights into the machine's potential applications. Another drawer contains mathematical reference texts, their leather bindings worn from frequent consultation. The central drawer holds her current manuscript notes upon notes, expanding far beyond mere translation into territory entirely her own. Thunder rumbles in the distance, a sound more comforting than alarming from within these solid walls. The occasional flash of lightning briefly transforms the window panes into brilliant squares of silver white before returning them to rain-streaked darkness. These momentary illuminations reveal the careful organization of Ada's workspace inkwells, positioned precisely, paper weighted against drafts, pencils aligned by length and sharpness. This orderliness extends beyond physical objects to Ada's approach to thought itself. Where others might see mathematics and machinery as realms of cold certainty, she perceives underlying patterns that connect seemingly disparate ideas. Her methodical arrangement of papers mirrors the structured pathways of her intellectual exploration. Each concept must find its proper place within a larger framework of understanding. The household staff have been instructed not to disturb her evening work, except for the occasional replenishment of tea or coal for the fire. Her husband, William King Noel, respects these hours of concentration, understanding them as necessary for his wife's intellectual pursuits. Their 3 children, Byron, Annabella, and Ralph, have long since been ushered to their beds, leaving Ada to the welcome solitude of mathematical contemplation. She lifts a page closer to the candlelight, studying a particularly complex sequence of operations designed to calculate Bernoulli numbers. Though the hour grows late, her focus remains unwavering. The rain's rhythm against the windows provides a soothing counterpoint to the melody of numbers and symbols flowing through her mind. In these quiet hours, with household responsibilities temporarily set aside, Ada finds a rare space of uninterrupted thought. Another low rumble of thunder, more distant now as the storm begins its gradual movement across London. Ada glances briefly toward the window before returning her attention to the page before her. Time operates differently during these sessions of deep concentration, hours passing with the weightless quality of minutes. The occasional chime of the grandfather clock in the hallway provides her only marker of conventional time's passage. While working, Ada occasionally brushes a stray lock of dark hair back from her fascia, small unconscious gesture that momentarily interrupts her otherwise perfect stillness. Her posture remains elegant even in solitude, back straight against the chair's wooden support, shoulders relaxed despite the intensity of her mental effort. This physical discipline complements her intellectual rigor, each reinforcing the other through hours of detailed analytical work. The writing desk holds one additional item of significance: a miniature portrait of Ada's mother, Annabella Milbanke, whose insistence on Ada's mathematical education from an early age helped shape her current path. Though their relationship remains complicated by Annabella's strict moral principles and controlling nature, Ada acknowledges the debt she owes to her mother's unusual educational priorities. Few young women of her social standing receive such thorough grounding in mathematics and science. As she reviews her latest annotations on Babbage's work, Ada's mind moves between concrete calculation and abstract possibility. The rain continues its gentle percussion against the windows, occasional drafts causing the candle flames to flicker and dance, casting momentary shadows across her carefully notated pages. Most mathematicians approach algebra through pure logic, their equations marching across pages in orderly, unadorned progression. Ada's approach differs subtly but significantly. In her notes on Babbage's engine, numbers become characters in an unfolding drama, operations transform into relationships, and solutions emerge as narrative resolutions. This unusual perspective mathematics understood through poetic metaphor allows her insights that more conventional thinkers might miss entirely. The analytical engine, she writes in one passage, weaves algebraic patterns just as the jacquard loom weaves flowers and leaves. This comparison between computing machine and textile equipment reveals her distinctive intellectual approach. Where others see mechanisms, Ada perceives tapestries of potential patterns waiting to be recognized and reinterpreted. Reading softly aloud helps Ada refine her phrasing. Her voice barely rises above a whisper, forming a gentle counterpoint to the rain's constant murmur. We may say most aptly that the analytical engine spins algebraical patterns as the jacquard, loom weaves flowers and leaves. The subtle revision satisfies her sensibility for both mathematical precision and literary elegance. This marriage of analytical and artistic thinking stems partly from Ada's unusual education. While receiving the rigorous mathematical training her mother demanded, she simultaneously absorbed the rhythms of poetry through her father's published works, the only connection permitted with the parent she never knew. Though Lord Byron died when Ada was 8 years old, his legacy of imaginative language infuses her approach to even the most technical subjects. In another passage, she considers the theoretical limits of computational machinery. The engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent. This remarkable insight that a calculating machine might generate art reaches far beyond Babbage's initial conception. While he focuses primarily on numerical calculations, Ada envisions applications extending into creative domains previously considered exclusively human. Her lamp casts a warm circle of light on pages filled with both conventional mathematical notation and extensive explanatory passages. Whereas most mathematicians of her era confine themselves to terse formulations, Ada believes in articulating the conceptual framework surrounding the equations. This approach occasionally frustrates Babbage himself, who sometimes suggests abbreviating her more philosophical diversions. Ada gently but firmly maintains their importance, understanding that future readers might require this broader context to grasp the machine's revolutionary potential. The science of operations, as derived from mathematics more especially, is a science of itself, and has its own abstract truth and value, she writes, the candlelight catching the still wet ink. This perspective that operations themselves constitute a distinct field of study, separate from the quantities they manipulate, represents one of her most profound insights. It anticipates by a century the development of computer programming as distinct from the data being processed. As midnight approaches, Ada pauses to sip cooling tea from a delicate porcelain cup. The brief interruption allows her mind to step back from detailed calculations and consider broader implications. This rhythmic alternation between focused analysis and expansive contemplation characterizes her approach to intellectual work, each mode of thought enriching the other in continuous dialogue. Rain continues its gentle percussion against the windows, now accompanied by the occasional soft pop and crackle from the hearth. These ambient sounds create a cocoon of comfortable isolation around Ada as she returns to her notes, pencil moving across paper with renewed purpose after her momentary respite. The particular section occupying her attention tonight concerns the machine's ability to follow instructions provided through punched cards, an adaptation of Jacquard's loom technology. Unlike previous calculating devices, the analytical engine could potentially alter its operations based on its own results. This recursive capability fascinates Ada, who recognizes in it something approaching artificial cognition. The analytical engine has no pretensions whatever to originate anything, she writes, carefully distinguishing between computational power and creative thought. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform. This clear-eyed assessment of machine intelligence, neither overstating nor underestimating its capabilities, reflects Ada's remarkable balance between visionary imagination and scientific precision. In her mind's eye, Ada envisions the hypothetical machine in operation, brass gears turning with perfect precision, each mechanical movement corresponding to a step in mathematical reasoning. Though the analytical engine exists only in diagrams and descriptions, she has developed such intimate understanding of its theoretical operation that she can almost hear the rhythmic clicking of its components, almost feel the subtle vibration of wheels engaging and disengaging according to programmed instruction. The machine she imagines resembles a mechanical orchestra, each component playing its prescribed part in a symphony of calculation. Numerical values flow through its gears and levers like melodies passing between instruments, transformed by operations analogous to harmony and counterpoint. This musical metaphor appears occasionally in her notes, another reflection of her integrative thinking across conventional disciplinary boundaries. Unlike Babbage, whose vision remains primarily focused on numerical calculation, Ada perceives applications extending far beyond mathematics. In her notes, she speculates about algorithmically generated music, automated textile design, and other creative applications that would not be realized for more than a century. These passages reveal her extraordinary foresight glimpsing what we now call multimedia computing from the limited vantage point of Victorian London. She pauses to stretch fingers stiffened by hours of writing, watching as rain traces continuously changing patterns down the window panes. These liquid algorithms, deterministic yet never precisely repeating, provide momentary meditation before she returns to the more structured patterns filling her pages. The hypothetical tapestry of future possibilities unfolding from Babbage's invention grows increasingly elaborate in Ada's imagination. She envisions a world where such engines might operate in concert, perhaps communicating their results to one another in networks of distributed calculation. This conception anticipates not merely computers as isolated calculating machines, but interconnected systems capable of coordinating their operations, a 19th-century glimpse of computational networks. While grounded firmly in the mathematical principles of her era, Ada's vision extends into territories where few contemporaries would follow. She recognizes that symbolic logic might be applied not just to numerical quantities, but to any system capable of formal representation, music, language, perhaps even aspects of reasoning itself. This insight underlies her most significant contribution, the first algorithm designed specifically for machine implementation. The grandfather clock in the hallway softly chimes 2, momentarily drawing Ada from her mathematical reverie. She has been working steadily for several hours, her concentration so complete that physical discomfort and fatigue have receded to the periphery of awareness. Now, becoming conscious once more of her surroundings, she shifts position slightly and reaches for her inkwell to continue a particularly important passage. The slight miscalculation of distance, perhaps the first sign of physical fatigue, results in an overturned inkwell. Black liquid pools on the corner of her manuscript before she can fully write the container. This minor domestic disaster might provoke frustration after hours of meticulous work, yet Ada responds with measured calm, quickly blotting the excess ink with a nearby cloth before it can spread further across her pages. The dark stain partially obscures a paragraph, yet Ada makes no sound of complaint. Instead, she studies the pattern with mild curiosity, observing how the ink follows unpredictable paths across the paper's fibers, another algorithm of sorts, governed by fluid dynamics rather than mathematical notation. After ensuring no further spread, she simply sets the affected page aside to dry and continues her work on a fresh sheet. This moment of imperfection and its unhurried remedy reflects Ada's broader philosophy toward both intellectual and practical matters. Unlike some mathematical contemporaries who pursue theoretical purity divorced from material constraints, she maintains awareness of the physical world in which abstract ideas must eventually find expression. The analytical engine itself, should it ever be constructed, would necessarily confront similar realities of material imperfection, requiring tolerance for minor variations and practical workarounds. As she transcribes the content from the stained page onto fresh paper, Ada takes opportunity to refine several phrases, finding more precise language to express her insights. This transformation of apparent setback into opportunity for improvement characterizes her approach to obstacles, intellectual flexibility that complements her rigorous analytical thinking. The ink-stained page, set aside rather than discarded, will later be incorporated into her final manuscript once dry. The visible reminder of process complete, with its imperfections, remains valuable in Ada's estimation. Her notes are not merely vehicles for transmitting completed thoughts, but records of thinking itself, including the occasional missteps and corrections that genuine intellectual exploration entails. Hours pass in steady progress, the storm gradually subsiding outside as Ada's work approaches completion. Occasional glances toward the windows reveal diminishing rainfall and, eventually, the first subtle lightening of the eastern sky. Dawn approaches, marking nearly 12 hours since she began this session of concentrated work. At her writing desk, Ada prepares to conclude her annotations. She reviews the substantial manuscript that has grown substantially beyond Babbage's original lecture her notes, now 3 times the length of the text they ostensibly explain. This expansion reflects not overindulgence but genuine intellectual contribution, transforming description of a calculating device into exploration of what we would now recognize as computer science. With careful attention, she applies sealing wax to the final pages, watching as crimson pools form then cool into glossy solidity. This physical sealing mirrors the intellectual completion of her work ideas now fixed in form, ready for distribution to the limited audience capable of appreciating their significance. She presses her personal seal into the cooling wax, leaving her mark upon work that will, unknowingly to her, influence generations beyond her own. The tired yet contented sigh she allows herself acknowledges both physical fatigue and intellectual satisfaction. Ada harbors no illusions about the immediate reception of her work. Few contemporaries possess sufficient background in both mathematics and mechanical engineering to fully grasp the implications of the analytical engine. Fewer still would look for such insights from a woman in an era when scientific circles remain almost exclusively male domains. Yet something in Ada's demeanor as she organizes her completed manuscript suggests awareness of a conversation extending beyond immediate circumstances. Though she cannot know the details, she senses that her work participates in longer intellectual traditions, both building upon past discoveries and extending toward future developments she will not live to witness. The morning light strengthens gradually, casting Ada's shadow across pages that contain seeds of computational concepts that will not fully blossom for a century. As birds begin their dawn chorus outside, she allows herself to rest, head leaning against the high-backed chair, eyes closed briefly against the growing daylight. Like Ada's mind finding rest after hours of focused calculation, perhaps your own consciousness now welcomes the gentle approach of sleep. The rain has stopped, both in our story and perhaps outside your own window. The candles have burned low, their light no longer needed as dawn brightens the sky. The pages of possibility that unfurled through Ada Lovelace's imagination now settle into the quietude of completion. As you drift towards sleep, carry with you the quiet satisfaction of ideas explored, of patterns recognized, of connections drawn between seemingly separate realms. Like Ada, closing her eyes after a night of productive work, allow your thinking to soften around the edges, definitions becoming less rigid, boundaries more permeable. The transition from wakefulness to dreaming mirrors her movement between precise calculation and intuitive insight, each state illuminating the other. Sleep approaches now, as gentle and inevitable as sunrise after a rainy night. Your breathing deepens, your thoughts grow more diffuse, mathematical certainties giving way to the logic of dreams. Rest in the knowledge that your mind, like Ada's, works in many modes, the conscious and unconscious, participating in continuous dialogue even as you surrender to sleep's embrace. The clouds hang low and heavy over the Danube, their grey expanse stretching from horizon to horizon like a vast woolen blanket pulled across the sky. It is the spring of 175 CE, and the afternoon rain falls in a gentle, persistent pattern across the Roman military encampment near Carnuntum. Water droplets collect on leather tent coverings before running in small rivulets toward the muddy ground below. The sound they make is barely perceptibly a whispered conversation between sky and earth that has continued since long before Rome pushed its boundaries this far north. Inside the Praetorium, the central command tent of the Legio I Adiutrix, Emperor Marcus Aurelius Antoninus has removed his armor piece by piece, each component carefully set aside by attendants trained to maintain the imperial regalia. The breastplate, polished to a soft gleam despite years of campaign wear, catches the muted light filtering through the canvas. Unlike the ornate ceremonial armor he wears in Rome, this is a soldier's protection functional, well-maintained, but bearing the small dents and scratches that speak of actual combat rather than mere display. The removal of this weight represents more than physical unburdening. As the final pieces are carried away, something in the emperor's bearing shifts subtly. The military commander remains visible in his posture back straight, shoulders squared, gaze direct, but another aspect of his nature emerges as well. The philosopher, temporarily submerged beneath the necessities of command, resurfaces in the quiet afternoon. Outside, steam rises from enormous iron cauldrons where the legion's meal simmers. The scent of boiled grains mingles with wild onions gathered by foraging parties and the sharp tang of the fermented fish sauce that Roman soldiers carry even to these remote frontiers. This humble sustenance will later be distributed among men accustomed to finding satisfaction in simple provisions. The emperor himself will eat the same meal, having long ago aligned his personal habits with the Stoic principles he studies and practices. Rain continues its gentle percussion against the tent's roof, occasionally growing stronger before subsiding again to a barely audible patter. This natural rhythm seems to complement the camp's afternoon routines, weapons being maintained, reports being compiled, wounded being tended. The machinery of Roman military discipline continues its operation, even in this moment of relative quiet, like a well-crafted timepiece whose internal mechanisms turn steadily, regardless of external conditions. Marcus Aurelius sits at a simple wooden table, a far cry from the ornate furniture of his palace in Rome. Before him lies a collection of papyrus sheets, some blank, others covered with Greek letters in various hands. These are his personal reflections, thoughts recorded not for publication or posterity but as exercises in his ongoing philosophical practice. In Rome, these writings might be stored in cedar chests to protect them from damage. Here on the frontier, they travel in leather cases, occasionally dampened by river crossings or sudden downpours. The emperor has dismissed most of his attendants, retaining only 2 secretaries who sit at a respectful distance, reed pens, and additional papyrus at the ready. These men have been chosen not only for their literacy and discretion, but for their ability to work in near silence, capturing the emperor's words without disrupting his thought process. They have learned to interpret his gestures, to distinguish between a phrase meant for recording and a mere thinking aloud that should remain ephemeral. That which is not good for the swarm is not good for the bee, Marcus dictates, his voice quiet yet precisely audible in the hushed tent. The secretary to his left dips his reed pen into an ink pot of iron gall solution and transcribes the words in Greek characters, the scratching of pen against papyrus, barely perceptible beneath the ambient sounds of rainfall and distant camp activity. This aphoristic style characterizes much of the emperor's personal writing, condensed insights rather than extended arguments, observations rather than systematic philosophy. Each entry exists as a self-contained reminder, a mental exercise through which Marcus reaffirms his commitment to rational thought and ethical action despite the constant pressures of imperial responsibility. Begin each day by telling yourself, "Today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness." He continues after a pause for reflection. The secretary writes steadily, accustomed to these unflinching assessments of human nature. All of these things happen to them by reason of their ignorance of what is good and evil. The rain intensifies briefly, fat droplets striking the canvas overhead with greater urgency before settling back into their previous gentle rhythm. This momentary increase draws a contemplative glance from the emperor, who finds in natural phenomena endless metaphors for human experience. The secretaries wait patiently, understanding that these pauses form an essential part of the process. The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. Marcus resumes, his gaze returning to the middle distance, indicative of deep thought. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This paradoxical observation that obstacles themselves provide the path forward reflects both personal philosophy and practical reality for a ruler who has spent much of his reign responding to crises. Plague has devastated the empire's population. Germanic tribes press constantly against the northern frontiers. Even his trusted co-emperor Lucius Verus died unexpectedly, leaving Marcus to bear imperial responsibilities alone. Yet from each challenge, he has extracted lessons in governance and personal conduct. The secretaries continue their work with practiced efficiency, occasionally pausing to prepare fresh ink or replace a worn reed pen. The scratch of their writing implements forms a subtle counterpoint to the emperor's measured dictation, proof that even in this remote military encampment, the intellectual traditions of Greece and Rome maintain their presence. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. Marcus continues, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly at this seemingly pessimistic assessment. The secretaries recognize the subtle humor in his expression. The emperor acknowledges human foibles without condemning them, understanding that such characteristics stem from ignorance rather than malice. They are certainly like this, the emperor continues, but remember that they act thus because they cannot do otherwise. We share a common nature, though our paths may differ. Should I expect a fig tree to bear olives, or an infant to possess the reasoning of a man? To be vexed at these limitations is to misunderstand the world. The secretaries exchange the briefest of glances. This compassionate perspective toward human failings contrasts sharply with the harsh judgments common among men of power. Yet it remains consistent with everything they have observed in their emperor, whose philosophical studies guide his treatment of even those who oppose him. Outside, the rain has settled into a steady, gentle rhythm that seems to soften the harsh realities of frontier life. The legionaries' voices sound more subdued than usual as they go about their duties, the natural dampening effect of rainfall creating a temporarily gentler acoustic environment within the camp. Marcus pauses in his dictation, rising slowly from his seat with the careful movement of a man who has spent too many hours in one position. At 54, the emperor feels the accumulated weight of campaigns conducted in harsh conditions, of illness endured while maintaining imperial responsibilities, of grief carried privately while projecting strength publicly. Yet his movements retain a deliberate dignity, gesture economical, purposeful, devoid of wasted effort. Continue tomorrow, he tells the secretaries, who immediately begin organizing the day's writings, capping ink pots and setting reed pens into their protective cases. They know better than to question this interruption. The emperor's habit of interspersing intellectual work with physical movement represents not distraction, but deliberate practice, mind and body maintained in balanced harmony, rather than artificial separation. As the secretaries bow and withdraw, Marcus selects a simple woolen cloak from those hanging near the tent entrance. Unlike the purple-bordered toga that marks his station in Rome, this practical garment differs little from what his officers might wear, warm, water-resistant, unremarkable. Draping it around his shoulders, he steps out into the gentle rainfall. The camp's sentries straighten as he passes, their discipline automatic despite the emperor's informal appearance. Marcus acknowledges them with a nod but does not break his steady pace toward the river. He has learned through decades of public life to move through spaces in ways that minimize disruption to others' duties, carrying his authority lightly despite its considerable weight. The path to the Danube grows increasingly muddy as he leaves the camp's organized gravel walkways. His boots' practical leather military caligae, rather than senatorial shoe, sink slightly with each step, leaving clear impressions in the soft earth. Marcus notes this small interaction between his body and the landscape with focused attention, observing how each footfall creates a temporary record of his passage that the continuing rain will eventually erase. This quality of attention characterizes the emperor's approach to the natural world. Where some men of his station might notice only those aspects of nature relevant to military advantage or resource extraction, Marcus observes with the patient curiosity of one who seeks wisdom in all phenomena. The Danube's flow contains lessons about persistence and adaptation. The surrounding forests demonstrate principles of interconnection and mutual support. Even the mud beneath his feet offers insights about impermanence and transformation. Reaching the riverbank, Marcus pauses to observe a pair of swans gliding across the water's surface. their white feathers stark against the grey-green river. Their movement appears effortless, though he knows powerful muscles work beneath the visible surface, an apt metaphor for governance itself, where the appearance of ease often disguises strenuous effort. The rain falls in vertical sheets here, where the land opens to the broad river, no longer deflected by tent canvas or tree branches. Droplets collect in the emperor's short beard and dampen his cloak, but he shows no sign of discomfort. The Stoic teachings he has studied since youth emphasize the distinction between unavoidable physical sensations and the judgments one attaches to them. Cold rain touching skin is merely a fact of nature. Interpreting this sensation as misery represents an unnecessary addition. This distinction between objective circumstances and subjective judgments forms the core of Marcus's daily practice, both in governance and personal conduct. The current campaign against rebellious tribes is not intrinsically good or bad, but simply necessary work to be performed with diligence. The discomforts of frontier life are neither punishments nor rewards, but neutral conditions to be met with equanimity. As he watches the river's flow, Marcus consciously aligns his breathing with its rhythm, slow, continuous, unforced. This practice of mindful awareness, drawn from both Stoic tradition and his own experience, helps maintain the internal tranquility upon which wise action depends. The moment contains no spectacular insight or dramatic revelation, only the quiet reinforcement of principles applied consistently through decades of self-discipline. A heron lands on the opposite bank, its long legs settling delicately into shallow water. Marcus observes its patient stillness, the focused attention it brings to hunting for fish. Nature continuously offers such examples of virtuous action, not through conscious intention but through perfect alignment with inherent purpose. The heron does not wish to be an eagle or question its role. It simply embodies what a heron is meant to be. After perhaps 20 minutes of this riverside contemplation, Marcus turns back toward the camp, his steps measured and deliberate. The afternoon's dictation represents only one aspect of his duties. Correspondence awaits his attention, as do the countless administrative decisions required, even in this remote location. The empire's functioning continues regardless of weather or the emperor's philosophical interests. Returning to his quarters, Marcus finds his secretary Avidius waiting with a stack of dispatches and letters. Unlike the philosophical dictation of earlier, this correspondence represents the practical work of governance reports from provincial governors, military communiques, and personal letters requiring imperial response. The transition between contemplative solitude and administrative responsibility occurs without visible effort, each role an integrated aspect of the same disciplined mind. Most pressing among these documents are letters to and from Rome, where Marcus's wife Faustina oversees affairs in his absence, acting with the authority he has explicitly granted her. Unlike many men of his era, Marcus regards his wife as an intellectual equal and capable partner in governance. Their correspondence mixes official matters with the personal closeness developed through decades of shared responsibility. To my Faustina, he begins dictating to Avidius, who prepares a fresh sheet of papyrus. The rains have come to the Danube, bringing temporary respite from military engagements, but much mud to our encampment. I trust this letter finds you and our children in good health, the affairs of Rome proceeding in orderly fashion under your supervision. The tone shifts subtly between formal update and personal affection, the emperor maintaining his characteristic balance between public duty and private connection. He inquires after their youngest children, still in Rome under Faustina's care, and sends specific messages to each. Despite the distance separating them and the weighty matters occupying his attention, Marcus maintains these family bonds with characteristic attentiveness. Tell Vibia that her letter describing her progress in Greek studies brought me particular pleasure, he continues, a slight softening in his expression, the only outward sign of paternal pride. Her handwriting shows marked improvement, and her observations about Aesop's fables demonstrate growing discernment. As Marcus completes the family correspondence, his gaze falls upon the laurel wreath that rests upon a small table nearby. This symbol of imperial authority, worn during official ceremonies even here on the frontier, shows signs of wear from travel and frequent handling. Several leaves have become detached, while others hang by weakened stems, the once vibrant green fading to a more subdued hue. With a brief gesture to Ovidius indicating that dictation has concluded for the moment, Marcus moves to examine the wreath more closely. Rather than summoning a servant to address this minor matter, he begins the repair himself, carefully reattaching loose leaves with thin strips of linen thread kept for such purposes. This attention to the symbolic regalia reflects not vanity but respect for the office he holds. The laurel wreath represents not Marcus Aurelius the man, but the principle of imperial authority that operates through him temporarily. Maintaining its appearance with his own hands reinforces his understanding of leadership as service rather than privilege. The repairs proceed methodically, each leaf given individual attention before being secured back into the circular arrangement. The task requires focus and manual dexterity, providing a different kind of mental rest from the abstract philosophical reflections or complex administrative decisions that occupy most of his day. In this simple maintenance work, Marcus finds another form of meditative practiceful attention directed toward immediate action without division or distraction. As twilight approaches, the repair of the laurel wreath complete, Marcus returns to the main chamber of his tent, where oil lamps have been lit against the gathering darkness. The rain continues outside, its rhythm now barely perceptible beneath the ambient sounds of the Legion's evening routine escentries, changing positions, orders being relayed, cooking fires being extinguished. An orderly has placed a small brazier near the Emperor's writing table, its modest heat sufficient to ward off the dampness that accompanies rainfall. The coals glow with subdued intensity, providing both warmth and subtle illumination that complements the oil lamps. Unlike the ostentatious heating systems of imperial palaces in Rome, this simple arrangement suits the practical conditions of campaign life. Marcus settles once more at his writing table, drawing a fresh sheet of papyrus before him. The philosophical reflections of the afternoon and the administrative work that followed have cleared space for one final contemplation before day's end. This evening ritual, performed regardless of location or circumstances, represents his most personal engagement with Stoic practice, a final accounting of the day measured against his ethical principles. Let evening find you gentle, contemplative, forgiving of human frailty, he writes, now recording his thoughts directly rather than dictating to secretaries. All error stems from ignorance, and even the most willful wrongdoing comes from mistaken beliefs about what constitutes good. Remember that you too remain prone to such errors, deserving the same patience you extend to others. The Emperor's handwriting flows across the page with practiced economy, each character formed precisely without unnecessary flourish. Unlike his public inscriptions, executed by skilled stonecutters according to formal templates, these private notes reflect his personal handleable but bearing the subtle inconsistencies that make handwriting as individual as the person producing it. Outside, torches are being lit along the camp's main pathways despite the continuing rain. Their flames hiss softly when larger droplets find their way through the protective coverings, creating momentary plumes of steam that dissipate into the damp evening air. This interplay between fire and water-opposing elements finding temporary equilibrium offers another natural metaphor for philosophical contemplation. All is flux, nothing stays still, Marcus writes, echoing Heraclitus, whose fragments he has studied since youth. No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man. Yet within this constant change, principles remain to guide us: truth, justice, temperance, courage. These virtues exist not despite nature's flux, but within it, providing stable reference amidst transformation. The scratch of his pen against papyrus continues, as darkness gathers more fully beyond the tent walls. This moment suspended between day's activity and night's rest holds particular significance in the Emperor's personal practice. Here, temporarily relieved of external demands, he can examine his own conduct with the same careful attention he brings to matters of state. Have I used this day well? Have I maintained composure when tested? Have I acted with justice toward those under my authority? Have I remembered my place within nature's larger patterns? These unwritten questions guide his evening reflection, each day providing fresh opportunities to align action with principle, to narrow the gap between philosophical ideal and lived reality. The concept of the inner citadel, a fortress of reason and virtue, impervious to external circumstance, appears frequently in Marcus's writings. This metaphorical space represents the mind's capacity to maintain tranquility regardless of events beyond its control. Though commanding vast military and political power, the emperor places ultimate value on this internal sovereignty that depends on no external validation. The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts, he records, the pen moving steadily across papyrus despite the day's accumulated fatigue. Therefore, guard accordingly, and take care that you entertain no notions unsuitable to virtue and reasonable nature. As he writes this final aphorism for the day, the rain outside intensifies briefly before settling back into its gentle pattern. Marcus listens to this natural rhythm, noting how it resembles human breath cycles of intensity and relaxation, advance and recession, presence and absence. The river he visited earlier flows with similar pattern currents, strengthening and subsiding, yet the overall movement continuing steadily toward destination. Setting aside his pen, the emperor rises and moves toward the tent's entrance, drawing aside the heavy canvas just enough to observe the camp at night. Torchlight reflects in puddles scattered across the compacted earth, creating temporary constellations that mirror the stars hidden by rain clouds above. Legionaries move purposefully between tents, their discipline maintained regardless of weather or hour. The empire continues its functioning through their collective effort, each individual contributing to purposes larger than personal comfort or preference. This recognition of interconnection, the individual existing within community, as community exists within nature, forms the foundation of Marcus's ethical framework. Unlike philosophical systems that emphasize personal salvation or private virtue, his Stoicism acknowledges the inescapably social dimension of human existence. Even here on the frontier, surrounded by those considered barbarians by many Romans, he perceives the common humanity that transcends cultural differences. Returning to his writing table, Marcus arranges the day's papers in orderly fashion, philosophical reflections, separated from administrative correspondence, personal letters gathered for transport back to Rome when opportunity allows. This physical organization reflects his mental discipline, each thought and responsibility assigned its proper place without confusion or overlap. The oil lamps burn with steady flames in the still air of the tent, their light softening the utilitarian furnishings of campaign life. Despite its functional simplicity, this space has temporarily become a center of both imperial authority and philosophical inquiry, power and wisdom coexisting without contradiction through the emperor's integrated approach to his dual roles. As he prepares for sleep, Marcus reviews tomorrow's necessity military councils in the morning, judicial matters at midday, perhaps further writing if circumstances permit. Yet beneath this schedule of specific duties lies the consistent application of principles that guide all his actions: justice toward others, acceptance of nature's processes, attention to present moment without anxiety about past or future. The rain continues its gentle percussion against canvas, a natural lullaby accompanying the camp's transition to night. Like the river flowing past the encampment, time moves forward regardless of human preference or resistance. The philosophical emperor understands that wisdom lies not in fighting this inevitable progression, but in moving harmoniously within it, accepting what cannot be changed while acting virtuously where action remains possible. Perhaps as you listen to this account of Marcus Aurelius on the Danube frontier, you might adopt something of his evening practice, this gentle review of the day now concluding, this acceptance of whatever weather life has brought you. The emperor would remind us that external circumstances, whether favorable or challenging, matter less than our internal response to them. As your own day moves toward its close, consider bringing attention to your breathing, just as Marcus did beside the river. Notice how your breath moves with its own natural rhythm, no effort required beyond simple awareness. The inhalation, the momentary pause, the exhalation, another pausa cycles continuing without conscious direction, just as the Danube flows whether observed or unattended. The rain falling on the emperor's tent nearly 2,000 years ago has long since returned to the greater cycles of naturally evaporating, forming clouds, falling again on landscapes transformed by time. Yet the words written during those quiet hours continue to offer guidance across centuries, speaking with remarkable immediacy to our own search for meaning and equanimity. Allow your attention to soften now, releasing the effort of focused listening. Like Marcus setting aside his pen at day's end, you might now set aside active thought, permitting consciousness to quiet itself gradually. The philosophical emperor understood that rest forms an essential counterpart to activitite state necessary, each containing its own wisdom when approached with appropriate attention. Sleep approaches like evening shadows lengthening across the Roman encampment, like rain clouds gathering above the Danube valley. No resistance is necessary, no hurry required. Simply allow yourself to drift, as Marcus himself would eventually drift from wakefulness to dreams, continuing to move with rather than against the natural rhythms that govern all existence. Rest now, breathe like the river, sleep